Hey folks, glad you could join us on another conversation on Business Redefined. This is your weekly, most comprehensive look at the world of business, finance and economics. Now, between the 12th and the 14th of May, we shall all be converging in Abidjan for the annual Africa CEO Forum, the 2025 edition. Every year, this year we're looking at about over 2,000 business leaders converging for a conversation on how we can ink a new deal between the private sector and the state and accelerate Africa's growth momentum. What is this all about? Why is it critical? Why should it be shaping the agenda, especially in this environment where global macros are becoming pretty interesting? I am privileged to have two gentlemen on set. That is Amir Ben Yahmed, the CEO of Jean Afrique Media Group, that is the entity behind the Africa CEO Forum, as well as Dr. James Mworia from Centum Investment. Gentlemen, glad to have you on set.
Thank you very much for having us.
Amir, let me kick off with you. For those of us who might not be familiar with the Africa CEO Forum, give us a one-on-one about the forum and why it is critical in shaping the agenda for the continent.
The Africa CEO Forum was created in 2012 on a simple premises that we needed to change from a narrative where the state was the main catalyst of growth to a world where the private sector was had to be the catalyst of growth. So in this time, we had delegation of politicians that were traveling throughout the world. There were never any CEOs. We had conferences. We had mainly politicians, and we identified that there was a conference to create in order to showcase the immense resources that Africa had in terms of private sectors, the thousands of CEOs that had companies from $100 million to several $billion. And we wanted to, one, showcase the strength of the Africa private sector, two, create a forum where the private sector would have a constructive dialogue with the public sector in shaping policies that were helping them to thrive and drive growth, and also trying to create a place where investors from the whole world could engage with the private sector and help finance growth. And of course, very early on, the question of market integration was at the core of the forum. And in 10 years, the forum has been now the most important economic and private sector conference in Africa. We are hosting about 2,000 CEOs every year, with a few heads of state, between 4 to 5, many ministers, many DFI, many private equity investors and financial investors in general. And it has grown as a place where the English-speaking Africa is meeting French-speaking Africa, Lusophone-speaking Africa. It has become really a place where all the private sector can show its strength and help be a driver of growth for the continent.
Thank you very much for that introduction.
And our friend James has been a regular attendee, and I'm sure we will have plenty of other things to say as from a participant's point of view.
Absolutely. That's a good way to pivot to James Mworia, who is a regular there because we've met there a couple of times. James, why is it particularly critical for you?
I beg your question. I missed the question because of connectivity.
Yeah, James, why is the Africa CEO Forum particularly important for you and Centum? We've met there before with you, James.
Yes, thank you. I think to pick up from what Amir said, the Africa CEO Forum is a private sector-driven forum around private sector-driven investment. And it's a wonderful forum of meeting like-minded individuals representing different companies from across Africa. So it is important for us because our vision is to be Africa's foremost investment channel. Our role is to create enterprises of scale and attract investors into them and create platform companies. And we've since recently pivoted also to creating special economic zones and the rest. So it's the most appropriate forum for an entity such as Centum to participate in. And we've seen it growing and the quality of the participation increasing over time. So it's a forum we are proud to be associated with and proud to continue to participate in.
Thank you, James. Amir, when we converged last year in Kigali, we were talking about the theme of, is Africa at the table, or is it on the menu? This time we're talking about, Is there a new deal that can be inked between the private sector and the state? Help us connect the dots between these two themes.
It's very simple. Last year, we were seeing the issue from a very macro perspective, meaning we were just out of the COP28, and we were seeing a major failure from Africa to be heard at this COP. And we were also witnessing several places or several discussions, especially in the financial discussion with the reorganization of the Bretton Woods, where Africa was totally disregarded. And this was a moment also where the concept of sovereignty, the post-COVID concept, was really taking place, were shaping itself, and where we could see a kind of multipolar world emerging. And in this multipolar world, there was a real importance for Africa to be more assertive on on the place that he wanted to have in this multipolar world, to think about his place in the value chains, and that was the discussion that we wanted to kickstart last year. Since last year, this, of course, sovereignty concept is all the more true, but it has changed because we've just saw what was happening with the US. The US has totally changed the narrative with I would have said a few weeks ago, I would have said a transactional world. Now it's a confrontational world where everybody's trying to make its place, but through transaction and through exerting of economic force, economic power. And so the discussion is, what can Africa do at this stage? Of course, the continent cannot play the same role as the European Union and the US, but we have some assets that we can capitalize on. And we are in the world also, so that's the first parameter. The first parameter, the world has changed, and as this confrontational world, this transactional world has totally, the speed with which it's changing is very important. And the second discussion is that we have also witnessed the situation of our countries. I'm talking about financial situations, and this dire situation is increasing. We have reached debt to GDP level that are very high. We've had several of our countries that have had defaults, and now we're seeing also some of the development aid financial flows that we're seeing decreasing. If you go a little bit further in the future, you can all see that the pressure on diaspora, on immigration, will also have a remittance impact on Africa. So there's a clear new issue about how to finance our growth. And so if you look at this, if you look at the sovereignty issues, what we think is that Africa's superpower, in that case, the hero that can help Africa's maintain or restructure its growth is the private sector, because they're the only one who are, let's say, driven enough, agile enough to answer to the challenges that we have, whether it's industrial policies, whether it's through financial innovation, whether it's digital transformation. We have to unleash the power of the private sector. And the whole subject of this next forum is to say how we can get to phase 2 of the private sector. Phase 1 being from, let's say, the late 90s, early 2000 to the 2020, pre-COVID. And now we need a new I don't know how to say that in English. I'm sorry, because sometimes I get rusty. Problem. My English gets rusty. But to get a new rhythm going for the private sector, and this will necessitate two or three transformation agenda that we'll be probably talking about a little bit later on. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Amir. And just to pivot now to Dr. James Mworia, when you talk about a new deal between the private sector and the state, I think Centum is a very good case in point. You now have special economic zones. Speak to us about how you are finding this pathway of finding a sweet spot, if I could call it, between the private sector, yourself, Centum, and the state.
No, thank you, Julian. So just for your viewers to have context, we've recently developed 2 special economic zones. and one is geared towards investment and services, and the second is geared towards manufacturing. So the one for investment and services is in Nairobi. It's called Two Rivers International Finance and Innovation Center. And the one on manufacturing is at the coast of Kenya. It's called the Vipingo Special Economic Zone. Now, the purpose of the Special Economic Zone is to have a domiciliation for enterprises that are looking towards not just the domestic market, but largely towards the export market. And they're looking at a location where they can be cost competitive by enjoying a range of incentives. There are fiscal incentives, there are incentives around access to work permits, and generally an improved business environment from an ease of business and environment perspective. We started off with the services zone earlier, and that had three macro objectives. One was to attract companies that would create a lot of jobs, export-oriented jobs. And I think we are seeing good traction in that area. We've attracted the largest business process outsourcing company in the world. It's called Teleperformance, and they are establishing their regional hub there. The second is attracting enterprise that would boost exports of services. And that we've succeeded. And that is attracting enterprise that would bring in foreign direct investment into the country. So we are collaborating with government in terms of creating platform entities. Because as you're aware, for a lot of African countries, Kenya included, they're operating within a very tight fiscal
Recording
space.
stopped.
So even though you may have the incentives to attract investors, given the tightness of the fiscal space, they may not have the capital to build the physical infrastructure. And that's where we come in. So for Traffic SEZ, we raised $55 million for additional space. But that was being overlaid on a very significant amount of capital that we had deployed within the zone. And for Vipingo SEZ, we've raised about $30 million now for the infrastructure, etc. So it's an interesting collaboration because government is playing the role I have always believed they should play, which is providing the regulatory environment and allow the fiscal, the private sector to mobilize capital and to bring private sector players. So that has been our experience so far. And so far, I think it's working quite well. We're working very well collaboratively.
Thanks, James, for that real-time case study. Let me come to Amir. One of the pillars that will be shaping conversation this year in Abidjan is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and how intra-African trade should be a catalyst for growth. Amir, given what we are seeing now in the global environment with the Trump tariffs and the retaliation we are seeing from the likes of China, speak to us about the importance of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area.
I wish we were not talking about this because it means we would be describing it. But I think we really need to stand up, all of us, private sector, the various stakeholders, because the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has been getting into force in 2019. So that's now 6 years. And every year, everybody's talking about the CFTA, everybody's talking about the CFTA. And at the end of the day, there's really little to show for. So we have a probably super general secretary offices in Accra. But most of my colleagues, participants, CEOs that I have been talking to are very seldom invited to many discussions that are being happening in terms of what type of services that needs to be targeted, what are about the frameworks that needs to be targeted. So basically, we have been advancing 6 years, and personally, and we have a media, so as we're covering that space. We have had very few opportunities talking about the advancement of the CFTA. But the CFTA has been unanimously celebrated as a main advancement for Africa because we recognize that many of our countries have a very small market, and especially now that we're getting into this transactional world with the tariffs, you understand that having a domestic market is super important. It's super important for you. It's super important for international investors. So the idea of having many sub-regions where we can trade easily is very important. But on the CFTA, I don't want to dwell too much into the details because the situation is complicated. But the whole thing is creating markets, it's creating value chains for Africa's companies to prosper. What James has been describing you is trying to get companies to settle in a very well-regulated responsibly fiscal zones to attract super investors that can then participate in value chains, export, hire people is really important. So now we're seeing the development of many economic zones, and that's a very good sign. But what we need to do today in this discussion is to get political action. And that's one of the transformation agenda I was talking about. If you look at the last 20, 25 years, you've seen a resurgence of political instability because in many countries, politicians have failed. And there's a lack of credibility of the political speech. And we need to go back to one thing, very important, especially for private sector stakeholders, is good governance, and I'm talking about good business governance and accountability. If we don't get this, we will not be able to create the smart public policies that are needed, and we will not be able to have them implemented correctly. So for us, most than the details, we need to have the vision, we need to have the implementation, and we need the private sector to be, the African private sector mainly, to be associated with the discussion that will help the CFTA become a reality.
James, I'm very curious on your thoughts about the criticality of the Africa CEO Forum 2025 in light of the developments we are seeing on the global scene, especially given the administration of Trump in the US.
Yeah, Julian, as I always say, the situation is what it is. So you focus on your circle of influence. It's unfortunate, but it's what it is. But I think it also creates opportunities, and it's good for us to meet. There may be a need for enterprises which want to access the US market to show their manufacturing and their activities in Kenya, in Africa generally. And that gives us a position to say, how can we be more attractive for businesses because some of these locations are now very expensive to manufacture in or to produce in, if you are looking at the kind of tariffs that have been imposed. It's unfortunate that there have been some African countries that have been hard hit, like Lesotho, but many others are in the minimum bracket of 10-15%. I was speaking to one of the BPO operators, actually, some of the ones that we're engaging in, and they said, look, they see a lot of also opportunities in the export of services, because many companies, not just in the US, but also in the UK and other places, they are looking at reduced revenues, and therefore you need to look at where you can have cost savings. And part of where you can have cost savings is offshoring of labor-intensive services, to the extent those exist in various African countries. So as private sector, we have to survive regardless of the environment, and sometimes you also want to thrive regardless of the environment. So I think this particular Africa CEO Forum is important because the context that we've been operating in since the Second World War is changing very fundamentally. The context around America being the promoter of global trade, the rules of WTO, those have changed. So I think it could not have come at a more appropriate time, so to sort of see then how do we position ourselves in this new context, not just to survive, but to thrive and also to be relevant to the rest of the world, but also how we can trade more with other regions, should there be a need to replace the gap that has been left by the US. But having said that, in this current issue of The Economist, I was surprised to see that the US accounts for only 15% of global import trade. So I think also we should not maybe overstate the impact of US's actions, especially if the retaliation is bilateral and therefore the rest of the global trade is not affected. Because sometimes in moments such as this is also the danger of overreacting to an event. And in fact, they made the point that in 5 years, the EU may have replaced the entire export market of the US by finding other partners. So given what has happened, I think it's actually more important that we meet and hopefully have this very topical discussion.
Thank you for that, James. And Amir, one of the issues which we expect to engage in at the forum will be how Africa can accelerate weaning itself from foreign aid and unlocking domestic sources of funding. Why is this important, Amir?
That's a very important you're making, Julian, and that's one of the things that really would like this forum to succeed in. A point that would like this forum to succeed in making. We've been discussing forum after forum about our relationship with the international community in general, and of course, Africa needs FDI. Of course, Africa needs to structure itself to be a player in the global market, especially what his place will be in some value chains, so that we can be exporter, gain flows of hard currencies. That's the way an economy is well run. But most of our solution is also in addressing our domestic needs ourselves, whether it is nationally or regionally or continentally. We're always talking about working with Turkey, with the US, with China, but I think one of the solution is also working with ourselves. So clearly, we're going to enter a world where we're going to have diminishing inflows, that's for sure, whether it's for aid, whether it's for remittance, whether it's from financial investments. But for me, the way we can finance our growth is, again, like James has described his job, right, is facilitating the private for investment from the African private sector. That's for me the main goal of what we need to the new mindset that we need to trickle is to get our governments to understand and unleash the strength of the private sector. You know, in many of the countries still, maybe not areas, but the private sectors is sometimes considered as a political foe. So we don't want to give them too much freedom. We don't want them to encourage to grow too much. And so there's still a little bit of this mindset. So for us to discuss the way of thriving in this new world is for governments to really try to work collaboratively with the private sector to define a vision, special industrial vision, in which market we want to grow. Do we want to be strong in refining some of the commodities? Do we want a tourism player? Do we want to be an actor of refined steel, refined bauxite, and everything? So trying to agree on vision, seeing which are the private sector players that we can empower. And I'm talking again about African private sector players, because we know that these players will be here and will fight to support growth, and not necessarily an international company that can come and go, as we saw, for example, the French banks that have most of the international banks that have left the continent. But it leaves the space open for African banks to thrive, to grow, to get to the same level as financial competitors. But these needs to have trust within ourselves and to have trust from the government to help them grow. And we need to do this sector by sector, have this vision. And that's going to be one of the problems of the TA in reality. That's something that we're not discussing. But it says who is going to be the producer of what, and who is going to be able to export to where without creating our own retaliation issues that happened by the past in Africa. So for me, the key here, and when we talk about this issue, is having clear vision, clear public policies, sector by sector, and creating the governance environment to make them a success, and helping private sector to create most of the wealth, and of course making sure that this growth is inclusive.
Thank you for that, Amir. James, we have only 1 minute to go, so let me give you some 30 seconds to give your parting shot, then Amir can also give his.
No, thank you. I think we are at an important point in the global economic history, and I think Africa has a role to play, and the private sector especially. And so this particular forum is important so that we can deliberate and see what we can take advantage of, where we need to pivot, where we need to protect ourselves. So I'm looking forward to the 2025 Africa CEO Forum.
Thank you. Amir, your closing thoughts?
Yes, we're definitely entering a new era, the post-COVID era, where the world is changing, where technology is changing. Especially, we didn't speak about this, but this has to be a main also area of investment for Africa. But all of this will come through the private sector, and we need to totally create a new public-private partnership to make Africa a key player in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. We have been having a conversation with Dr. James Mworia and Amir, who heads up Jeune Afrique, the entity behind the Africa CEO Forum, highlighting the issues we anticipate to be engaging in Abidjan, that is in May, that is between the 12th and the 14th. Be sure to join us there and follow also online any conversations we shall be having, highlighting the issues affecting the continent. So stay tuned to Business Redefined.